So when it comes to Xbox, there's always some kind of negative slant or tilt or something that like a lot of these sites or channels or media outlets will try to go out there and, say. And I always look at these things and I'm just like, why make these comments about Xbox when Microsoft actually goes out there and, responds to a lot of these now, So it's crazy to me how this kind of happens. It's one of those things that it's weird because people still want to believe that Xbox doesn't kind of get hit with sort of a media bias. And to be honest with you, it does very much feel like there's this media kind of frenzy happening that they go around and whenever something's rumored about Xbox, they report it as factual. They're like, oh, this is something that is, horrible or whatever. This is something that, all these things kind of happen and they just jump on the hate train without hearing any kind of real explanation or waiting to hear from Xbox themselves. Xbox responds like this, and suddenly nobody retracts it. Nobody says anything different. Everybody just kind of sticks with the hate, and it's just crazy to me. And I want to get into this because this is going to be an interesting video. What's up, everybody? I'm Crap Gamer. This is Crap Gamer Reviews with another video. Thank you guys so much for checking it out. I appreciate it. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, hype the video. Watch it as long as you possibly can. I certainly do appreciate that. It does mean the world to me. You guys have been incredible. But yeah, the likes and the comments and stuff, those are the most important things. So do those if you can. Certainly would be appreciated. Now, when it comes down to it, we all know that people assume that Xbox, just honestly, the way that Xbox has kind of handled these things has been kind of crazy. A lot of people say, oh, well, Xbox gamers don't buy games, they don't do this, they don't do that. And the thing is, I can understand where some of that comes from because obviously I truly believe that, Game Pass has kind of forced people to get into the habit of not buying some games, but I still think that people buy games. I just think it's obvious when you have half the install base as, PlayStation, that people are going to go out there and buy. It's going to be by comparison. It's going to be less games, even if they are buying them. It's going to be less games or whatever the case may be. So that's something that is very interesting to me. Because, at the end of the day, like a lot of times this stuff gets proven that it's wrong. And so it's specifically with this, it was kind of proven that it was wrong. So Final Fantasy VII Rebirth apparently has sold very well, despite launching a couple years later. And so now, like, Square have actually kind of confirmed this. So Final Fantasy VII Rebirth made quite a splash when it first launched as a PlayStation 5 exclusive back in 2024, according to Square Enix's financial results. It looks like the RPG is still making waves on Xbox 2 years later. The Japanese publisher shared some interesting sales figures for Q1 of its fiscal year, revealing that 32.3% increase in net sales and an 88.6% boost in operating income. All of this is to say Square Enix is having a pretty good year, and it seems solid sales from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and The Adventures of Elliot on Xbox and Switch 2 have played a big part of that. In the HD high-definition game segment, consolidated net sales and operating income for a 3-month period ended June 30th, 2026 increased compared with the same period of the previous fiscal year, driven by solid performance from new titles included Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for Nintendo Switch 2, Xbox Series X and S, and Windows, and The Adventures of Elliot, as well as growth in sales of catalog titles. Another interesting factoid from the financial results was the split between physical and digital game purchases, with digital accounting for 90%, and the numbers represent sales across all platforms as well, but it's worth sharing. But also I have to kind of point out that they only offered Final Fantasy Rebirth on Xbox digitally. Like, these games haven't been available physically, so it's not something that that they're going to be able to kind of do. So that's just kind of how it is. I wish they would, but I think it's probably less of a risk for them to do that digitally, and so you kind of understand a little bit of that with how it is. But anyway, it's kind of crazy, regardless of how this kind of goes about. But again, it's nice to see it. That definitely debunks some of the thought process, some of the hate that people would have for Xbox, saying that, oh, well, nobody buys it, nobody does this, nobody does that. Obviously, people really go out of their way to kind of look at Xbox in a negative light, regardless of what's going on, or regardless of how some of these things have kind of reacted or whatever. So that's crazy to me. I do find it to be interesting that this kind of happened. So among various Square Enix titles, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was a standout in the recent Xbox Ultimate Summer Sale, with the RPG receiving a 40% discount alongside Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate. They got 65%. That undoubtedly would have helped boost some sales on the Xbox Store, but it's no surprise that the 2024 Game of the Year runner-up sold well on Xbox hardware, unlike the previous two Final Fantasy VII remakes, which had staggered launches across consoles. The upcoming 7 Revelation is set to launch simultaneously on Xbox, PS5, and Nintendo Switch 2. So yeah, it's nice to see that Xbox has been able to kind of step their game up a little bit. Xbox gamers going out there and doing the right thing, buying some games, supporting some games. That's really what it really kind of comes down to. I honestly feel like Microsoft is doing some very cool things here, and they're clearly making sure that gamers have some cool stuff to play, some choices and stuff like that. And again, that's where it all comes down to, being able to kind of go out there and have gamers that are willing to kind of spend some money, and how Microsoft have kind of changed their tune a little bit. So I do like to see that happening. And for me anyway, it's just fun to see how they've managed to get some of these things going in a way that gets gamers excited again. And for me, that's what it's all about. Microsoft has been able to do that. They've managed to get some deals with these kind of companies like Square, who wasn't traditionally supporting Xbox. They were kind of skipping Xbox, kind of treating Xbox gamers like a joke. And now we see that, they aren't a joke. They're a viable source. Now, does this mean that every game's going to sell gangbusters on Xbox? No, of course not. It doesn't mean that at all. But what it does mean is that there's hope for Xbox, and that, there's a good reason to bring, some of these games to the platform. And, that's going to be very interesting to see how this kind of happens in the future. So, again, that's where some of this stuff happens, and people are going to have like different thoughts and reactions to this stuff. But like I said, I'm grateful that Microsoft has kind of changed up how they do these things and how they handle these things, and being able to offer some of these games that we weren't getting before. I think that's a big thing. And I still think it's a big thing that Microsoft was doing a lot of the things that they were doing initially back in the 360 era, when they were first getting 360 Final Fantasy games. That was a big deal too. So I look at this stuff as a big deal. There's obviously a want for people to get these games and stuff on the platform, and so it's nice to see that Microsoft is actively listening to the fans and bringing that stuff home. Like I said, it's super important as far as I'm concerned, and nice to see that Microsoft has responded quite well to what the fans have been asking for, and making sure that they're doing the things that the fans are wanting. So I love that. I like to see it. It's super interesting to see how these things kind of play out, and how these things are going to end up kind of coming together for Xbox at the end of the day. So love to see that. Love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions on it. Are you guys interested in the Final Fantasy games? Have you guys bought any of the Final Fantasy games on Xbox? I think it's like, isn't Xbox the only place where you can play pretty much all the Final Fantasy games? I think that might be true, which is a weird thing, because at the end of the day, You know, I just kind of look at that as strange. You know, Xbox. It'd be like Xbox being the only place to play all the Metal Gear games, right? That would be insane to me. So it's crazy to think that literally every Final Fantasy game is only available on Xbox. Crazy. Let me know what you guys think. Rack 'em up. Crap Gamer out.